Classic Games History, Falcon 4.0. Chapter 1. Forward. A war that didn't wait for the player. The year is 1998. Pentium processors are getting faster and faster. 3D accelerators are revolutionizing the look of computer games, and most desks are still equipped with heavy CRT monitors. Amidst all this, a flight simulation game was released with an almost megalomaniacal concept, Falcon 4.0. The focus is on the F-16 Fighting Falcon. But the developers don't just want to simulate a fighter jet. They want to simulate the war behind it. While the player flies their mission, other units launch their own missions. Ground troops are on the move. Radar and anti-aircraft positions protect key areas. Targets are attacked, and the military situation changes. War doesn't wait for the player. And that is precisely what forms the heart of Falcon 4.0. The dynamic campaign. Missions aren't meant to be played off one after another. They arise from a conflict that is constantly evolving in the background. At the same time, the F-16 itself is simulated with an extraordinary level of detail, even by the standards of the time. Flight model, radar, navigation, weapons, artificial intelligence, and multiplayer come together in a dynamic war zone. And all of this has to be calculated by a home computer from 1998. The vision is immense, perhaps too ambitious. After years of development, Falcon 4.0 was released in late 1998 with impressive simulation depth, but also with bugs, technical issues, and enormous hardware demands. Normally, a story like this might be over just a few years later. But with Falcon, the opposite happens. Official development comes to an end. The community carries on. Patches and modifications gave rise to new branches of development, and ultimately, with Falcon BMS, a further evolution that keeps Falcon alive even decades later. This makes Falcon 4.0 more than just the story of an old flight simulator. It's the story of an idea that nearly crumbled under the weight of its own ambitions, and survived precisely because of that. How did this extraordinary project come about? Why did its dynamic campaign become legendary? What hardware was actually needed in 1998? And how did this lead to a simulation that is still being developed even in 2026? To answer these questions, we have to go back to the beginning, to the story of a series that, long before Falcon 4.0, sought to push the limits of the home computer. This is the story of Classic Games History, Falcon 4.0. Chapter 2. The Roots of Falcon. The story of Falcon 4 begins more than 10 years before its release. As early as 1987, a military flight simulation called Falcon was released, featuring the F-16 Fighting Falcon. Technical capabilities were modest back then. Simple polygonal landscapes, a limited color palette, and highly simplified cockpits defined the game. But Falcon was already pursuing an idea that would later shape the entire series. The focus was not on fast-paced action, but on mastering a fighter jet. With Falcon 3.0, in 1991 came the major technical leap forward. Faster PCs enabled more complex flight models, more extensive missions, and a significantly deeper simulation. Particularly interesting was the support for a mathematical coprocessor. On appropriately equipped computers, Falcon 3.0 could calculate a more sophisticated flight model. This early on revealed a philosophy that would later prove decisive for Falcon 4. More computing power didn't just mean better graphics, it meant more simulation. Falcon 3.0 was successfully expanded and cemented the series' reputation among discerning flight simulation enthusiasts. But in the mid-1990s, the PC market changed rapidly. Pentium processors were getting faster. CD-ROM drives became widespread. 3D accelerators ushered in a new generation of graphics. And competitors like TFX, EF-2000, and US Navy fighters demonstrated just how quickly military flight simulations were evolving. A Falcon 3.0 with better graphics wouldn't be enough, therefore. The next installment had to take a bigger leap forward. The F-16 was to become significantly more detailed. But at the same time, a much more radical idea emerged. Why simulate just the aircraft? Why not also simulate the war in which it is deployed? Air wings, ground forces, Air defense, airfields, and strategic targets were to be interconnected, forming a single world from which new missions could emerge. Thus, what had been planned as a sequel became a project that went far beyond Falcon 4.0. The question was no longer, how well can we simulate an F-16? But rather, how much of an entire war can a PC calculate at once? And it was precisely this question that marked the beginning of the development of Falcon 4. Chapter 3. The Development. A Vision Becomes a Problem. Falcon 4 was supposed to be a huge step forward. Development began at Spectrum Holobyte, which was closely associated with the Falcon series. Among the key figures behind the project was Steve Blankenship, who led development for a significant period of time. The F-16 was to be simulated in much greater detail than before. To achieve this, the flight model, radar, navigation, weapons and cockpit systems had to be reimagined and significantly expanded. But the real challenge lay outside the cockpit. A dynamic war zone was to be created in the background. As a result, the team was effectively developing two games at the same time: a complex flight simulation and a military strategy system that managed a conflict autonomously. This presented a massive problem. In a classic mission, a developer can determine when an enemy appears and what happens next. In Falcon, many such situations were supposed to arise from the ongoing war. This made the world more unpredictable, but it also made debugging much more difficult. Furthermore, a PC from the 1990s was simply unable to fully calculate all the units involved in the war at any given time. Falcon therefore had to simulate distant events in a simplified manner and only transform them into detailed aircraft, vehicles, and battles when the player got close to them. And while the team was working on these problems, PC technology was changing at a breathtaking pace. Windows 95 became the standard. Pentium processors were getting faster. And within a few years, new 3D accelerators transformed expectations for computer game graphics. For Falcon, this became a race against time. What had been state-of-the-art at the start of development could already seem outdated before the game was finished. At the same time, the organizational structure behind the project changed. Spectrum Holobyte and MicroProse merged, and Falcon 4 was ultimately released under the well-known name MicroProse. The years passed. Costs rose. So did expectations. And the project had become so complex by then that key features could hardly be removed without difficulty. The detailed F-16 was Falcon 4. The dynamic campaign was Falcon 4. Without these systems, the project might have been completed more quickly, but it wouldn't have been the game they set out to create. By the end of 1998, the holiday shopping season was finally approaching. After years of development, Falcon 4 was set to be released. In December, the simulation was finally on store shelves. The vision had become a reality. But Falcon 4.0 very quickly revealed the price of that vision. After all, being released was far from meaning finished. Chapter 4. 1998. Release. Between Fascination and Frustration. In December 1998, the years-long wait was over. Falcon 4.0 was released for Windows PCs. Even the packaging made it clear that MicroProse wasn't trying to sell a quick flight simulation for casual play. Particularly impressive was the comprehensive printed manual, which ran to several hundred pages. It not only explained keyboard commands, but also provided players with an in-depth introduction to radar, navigation, weapon systems, and tactical fundamentals. Falcon 4 was a game that demanded to be mastered, and that was precisely part of its appeal. Anyone who immersed themselves in the simulation was rewarded with a detailed F-16, complex missions, and a dynamic campaign that went far beyond a typical sequence of pre-scripted missions. But the excitement had a downside. Falcon 4 was released with numerous technical issues. Crashes, artificial intelligence glitches, and inconsistencies within the campaign made it clear that this massive project wasn't quite ready yet. Added to this was its enormous hardware demands. Even for high-performance PCs of the late 1990s, Falcon was quite a challenge. After all, the computer didn't just have to render the three-dimensional world. At the same time, the flight model, sensors, weapons, artificial intelligence, and the calculations for the dynamic campaign were all running. The trade press therefore quickly recognized both sides of Falcon 4. On the one hand, there was an exceptionally ambitious simulation with impressive depth. On the other hand, there was a program whose technical issues were hard to overlook. Falcon could both fascinate and frustrate within the same hour of gameplay. For MicroProse, the release was therefore by no means the end of the work. Patches had to follow. But hidden beneath the bugs was the game that many fans had been waiting for years. And to understand why Falcon 4 sparked such fascination despite all its problems, we must now go back to where this simulation truly began, the cockpit of the F-16. Chapter 5. The Game. In the F-16 cockpit, anyone who launched Falcon 4.0 for the first time quickly realized this simulation took some getting used to. Various realism options certainly made it easier to get started, but anyone who wanted to experience Falcon in all its depth had to familiarize themselves with the F-16 Fighting Falcon. It all started with the flight model. Speed, altitude, fuel, and armament all influenced the aircraft's behavior. Energy became a decisive factor, especially in dogfights. If you lost too much speed in tight turns, you could go from attacker to the hunted in a matter of seconds. The real complexity, however, lay in the cockpit. Radar, navigation, displays, and weapon systems weren't just for show. The player had to understand the information and make decisions based on it. In aerial combat, enemies could be detected and engaged even when out of sight. But firing a missile didn't automatically mean a hit. Distance, altitude, speed, and position all played a crucial role, while the opponent could react in turn. In close combat, the rules changed. Now, speed, maneuverability, and energy management became crucial, right up to the use of the onboard cannon at close range. But Falcon wasn't just about aerial combat. Many missions targeted ground targets. Airfields, vehicles, bridges, radar stations, and anti-aircraft positions could be attacked. Depending on the mission, different bombs and guided missiles were available. And it was the enemy's air defense, in particular, that created some of the most tense moments. A warning from the radar warning receiver could turn a calm approach into a tense situation within seconds. Continue the attack, evade, deploy countermeasures, or abort and save the aircraft. It was precisely these kinds of decisions that defined the gameplay experience. Falcon wasn't non-stop action. Sometimes you'd fly along your route for minutes on end, monitoring instruments and observing your surroundings. But then all it took was a radar contact, a radio message, or a warning. And suddenly, the calm was over. Even after a successful attack, the F-16 had to head back home. With low fuel or a damaged aircraft, even the return to base could feel like a small victory. That's why the Falcon didn't just reward shoot-downs. It rewarded preparation, patience, and mastery of the aircraft. But even a detailed F-16 wouldn't have made Falcon 4.0 exceptional on its own. The real standout feature, meanwhile, worked unnoticed in the background. For while the player kept an eye on his instruments, Falcon was trying to calculate something much bigger, an entire war. Chapter 6. The Dynamic Campaign. A war that continues. The greatest feature of Falcon 4.0 wasn't in the cockpit, it was working behind the scenes. The dynamic campaign. Many flight simulators of that era guided the player through preset missions. Falcon took a different approach. Here, the war was supposed to come first, and the missions were to emerge from this war. In the background, the simulation managed numerous military units and strategic targets. Airfields, air wings, ground forces, radar stations, air defense, bridges and other key facilities. An overarching campaign strategy assessed the military situation and used it to plan new operations. If an enemy air defense position became a threat, it might be necessary to engage it. If ground troops needed support, corresponding attack missions were launched. Enemy aircraft had to be intercepted, and friendly formations had to be protected. The player's mission was thus only a small part of a much larger conflict. While the player's F-16 was in flight, other aircraft took off on their missions and units moved on the ground. As a result, the player could encounter formations that had absolutely nothing to do with his own mission. This is precisely what created the crucial illusion. This world exists even without me. Technically, this was extremely demanding for a 1998 PC. Falcon couldn't possibly simulate every vehicle and every aircraft across the entire map in full at all times. That's why the system operated with different levels of detail. Events far away could be calculated in a simplified manner. As the player got closer, these had to be rendered as specific aircraft, vehicles, weapons, and battles in the three-dimensional world. This system created situations that no mission designer had planned exactly. A seemingly simple attack could escalate due to fighters suddenly appearing. Anti-aircraft fire could force a detour. Other units might already be engaged in combat. Or a mission that seemed dangerous turned out to be surprisingly calm. Notes, too, could have consequences. Casualties, destroyed targets, and developments on the ground influenced the further course of the conflict. Of course, this system didn't always work perfectly. Precisely because so many elements interacted with one another independently, errors occurred and the artificial intelligence sometimes made strange decisions. But when everything came together, the result was something that set Falcon 4.0 apart from many of its competitors. The player didn't simply work through a list of preset missions. They were a pilot in the midst of a war that had already begun before takeoff and continued after landing. And that is precisely why the dynamic campaign became perhaps the most important legacy of Falcon 4.0. Because as early as 1998, Falcon posed a question that has remained compelling for military flight simulations to this day. What if we simulated not just the aircraft, but also the war? Chapter 7. Missions, AI, and Multiplayer. The war in the background eventually gave rise to the next mission. Depending on the military situation, Falcon 4 could generate different missions. Interception missions, air superiority, attacks on ground targets, countering enemy air defenses, or protecting other units. Before takeoff, the player could familiarize themselves with the route, the target, and potential threats. This preparation was crucial. Anyone who knew where enemy anti-aircraft defenses were located or from which direction enemy fighters might appear had a clear advantage. During missions, the player was often part of a formation. Computer-controlled wingmen could be directed via radio commands to attack targets or respond to threats. However, the artificial intelligence wasn't always reliable. Wingmen occasionally made strange decisions, and the dynamic campaign could generate situations to which the AI did not react convincingly. But it was precisely this unpredictability that sometimes made for the best interactions. No mission had to end exactly the way it began. Falcon became even more interesting when real people took over the role of the computer-controlled pilots. Falcon 4.0 often multiplayer, at a time when many players were still going online via analog modems or ISDN. Stable connections were by no means a given. Nevertheless, players could fly missions together, assign tasks, and work together as a squadron. Who's going to attack the target? Who monitors the airspace? And who protects the other aircraft? This collaborative flying gave rise to virtual squadrons. Players trained together, shared experiences, and organized missions. For some members of the community, this meant that Falcon wasn't just a game you'd eventually finish playing. It became a hobby, and it was precisely this dedicated community that would later prove crucial to Falcon 4.0's very survival. But all these systems placed heavy demands on the computer. Falcon didn't just need a good pilot, it also needed a damn good PC. And with that, let's take a look at what people actually wanted on their desks back in 1998. Chapter 8. Hardware and Technology. The Falcon PC of 1998. Falcon 4 didn't just demand a lot from its players. The computer had to work hard too. The minimum requirements were listed as a Pentium running at 166 MHz and 32 MB of RAM. But as is often the case with demanding PC games, there was a clear difference between Falcon running and Falcon runs really well. The processor was particularly important. While the graphics card rendered the three-dimensional world, the CPU had to simultaneously calculate the flight model, artificial intelligence, sensors, weapons, and numerous processes of the dynamic campaign. A faster processor therefore provided a noticeable advantage. Anyone looking to build a high-performance Falcon PC in late 1998 would likely have opted for a Pentium II running at 300, 350, or 400 MHz. The then-new Pentium II 450 was already considered high-end. It was also worth investing in more RAM. 32 MB was sufficient for entry-level use. With 64 MB of RAM, a gaming PC had significantly more headroom. Then came the graphics card. In the late 1990s, the PC was in the midst of the great 3D revolution. Graphics accelerators like the 3D-FX Voodoo 2, NVIDIA Riva TNT, and Matrox G200 were among the best-known representatives of this generation. A fast 3D card could render Falcon much more beautifully and smoothly, but it couldn't simply compensate for a weak processor. There were simply too many calculations running in the background. In addition, a hard drive with sufficient free space, a CD-ROM drive, and a DirectX-compatible sound card were required. Falcon 4 ran on the Windows systems of the time, particularly Windows 95 and Windows 98. But a true Falcon workstation consisted of more than just a PC. A decent joystick was just as important. Manufacturers such as Thrustmaster, CH Products, Microsoft, and Logitech offered models of varying complexity back then. A simple joystick was enough to get started. Those who wanted to delve deeper into simulation could already take things much further by the late 1990s. A separate throttle allowed for finer control of the engine. Hat switches and additional buttons put important functions right at your fingertips. And with rudder pedals, the rudder could also be controlled with the feet. However, a setup like this, consisting of a joystick, throttle, and pedals, was no longer a cheap toy. For enthusiastic flight sim pilots, the desk could thus slowly begin to resemble a small cockpit. Nevertheless, the keyboard remained indispensable. Falcon 4 simply had too many functions to fit everything onto a joystick of that era. And in front of this setup usually stood a heavy CRT monitor, often with a 15 or 17-inch screen diagonal. No 4K, no virtual reality, no ultra-wide screen. Instead, perhaps a Pentium II, 64 MB of RAM, a fast 3D graphics card, a joystick, and a throttle. And somewhere nearby, the massive Falcon manual. That's what high-end flight simulation looked like in the late 1990s. And even a computer like that couldn't free Falcon 4 from its biggest problem. More processing power made the simulation run faster. But that didn't make the bugs in the program disappear. Instead, Falcon needed patches. Chapter 9. Patches, the end of development, and the source code. After its release, Falcon 4 needed further improvements. MicroProse released several patches that fixed bugs, improved stability, and refined various aspects of the simulation. The last major official development release was version 1.08. But while Falcon was being technically improved, the company behind it was changing. MicroProse had already gone through some turbulent years. In 1993, the company had been acquired by Spectrum Holobyte. Later, it resumed operations under the better-known name MicroProse. The next major change came in 1998. Hasbro Interactive acquired MicroProse. Falcon 4 was thus released during a period of major restructuring, of all times. For a game that actually still required intensive support after its release, this was not a good starting point. The decisive turning point finally came in 1999. The Falcon 4.0 development team was disbanded. This brought an end to the continuous official development much sooner than many players had hoped. Normally, this is when the slow decline of a computer game begins. But Falcon took a different path. The community had already begun developing its own improvements. And in 2000, something happened that changed the course of history forever. The source code for Falcon 4 appeared on the internet. This was not an official open source release. The program code was circulated without formal release. Legally, the situation was problematic. Technically, however, it opened up entirely new possibilities. Programmers could now delve much deeper into Falcon, correct errors, modify systems, and develop features that would have been virtually impossible with standard modifications. This marked the beginning of a new, and initially rather chaotic, era. Different groups worked on different versions. Not everything was compatible with each other. Not every project survived. But something decisive had happened. the future of Falcon 4 no longer lay exclusively with a commercial developer. It increasingly lay with the people who were actually supposed to just play the game. The community. Chapter 10. The community takes over. With the source code now available, Falcon 4 began an unusual second life. Programmers and modders worked to fix bugs, improve graphics and avionics, and push the technical limits of the original simulation. But there wasn't just one Falcon community version. Various groups developed different branches. Among the well-known names were SuperPac, Free Falcon, and Open Falcon. For fans, that meant a constant stream of new possibilities. For newcomers, however, it also meant confusion. Which version should you install? Which extensions work together? Falcon lived on, but at times in several different worlds. This led to an interesting interim phase in 2005. The development team Lead Pursuit, which included members of the Falcon community, released another commercial version, Falcon 4, Allied Force. Among other things, Allied Force improved stability, the campaign, artificial intelligence, and multiplayer. Above all, it offered something that was particularly welcome in the Falcon world at the time, a relatively straightforward installation process. But even that didn't mark the end of community development. Another team would prove even more important for Falcon's long-term future, benchmark sims. The goal was no longer just to keep Falcon 4 running on modern computers. The simulation itself was to be further developed. Flight model, avionics, multiplayer, graphics, and the dynamic campaign. Falcon BMS 4.32 was finally released in 2011. By that time, Falcon 4 was already more than 12 years old. But instead of slowly fading away, the simulation began a new phase of technical development that continues to this day. From a game that nearly failed due to its own ambitions in the late 1990s, the foundation was laid for something its original developers could hardly have foreseen: Falcon BMS. Chapter 11. Falcon BMS, from 1998 to 2026. When Benchmark Sims released Falcon BMS 4.32 in 2011, the original Falcon 4.0 was already more than 12 years old. But BMS was not meant to become a museum piece. The goal was not simply to keep Falcon alive on modern computers. The simulation itself was further developed. Over the following years, flight models, avionics, artificial intelligence, multiplayer, and numerous technical systems were revised. The F-16, in particular, remained the heart of Falcon. Anyone who flies BMS at a high level of realism must engage intensively with the aircraft. Radar, navigation, sensors, weapon systems, and cockpit procedures all require training. A mission often begins long before the actual combat. Technically, too, BMS continued to diverge further and further from the 1998 version of Falcon. Version 4.32 was followed by several major development stages. In 2026, the 4.38 generation once again significantly modernized the simulation. The game world's visuals, in particular, were further refined. Terrain, lighting, and other graphical elements ensure that, at first glance, BMS today hardly looks like a game from the late 1990s. Of course, Falcon can't hide its origins entirely. BMS is not a simulation developed from the ground up, but that's exactly what makes the results so remarkable. Modern screen resolutions and complex HUD systems are now just as much a part of it as support for virtual reality. So today, a player wearing a VR headset finds themselves in a simulation whose predecessor was developed for Pentium processors and CRT monitors. But despite all the changes, the most important element has remained: the dynamic campaign. Players are still part of a larger conflict in which other units carry out their own operations and the military situation continues to evolve. Multiplayer also plays an important role. Virtual squadrons can plan operations together, assign tasks, and carry out complex missions. As a result, Falcon has long been more than just an old computer game for many players. It's a hobby that can be learned over the years and enjoyed together. Also noteworthy is the direct connection to the original. A valid Falcon 4.0 license is still required for regular use of Falcon BMS. This means that a computer game from 1998 still serves a practical purpose even decades later. Almost everything surrounding Falcon has changed. Back then, it was Pentium processors, megabytes of RAM, and CRT monitors. Today, it's modern multi-core processors, high-performance graphics cards, HOTAS systems, and virtual reality. But one idea has survived all this technological change. The player sits in an F-16, and outside the cockpit, the war rages on. That's exactly why Falcon can still hold its own alongside modern flight simulations, even decades after its release. And that inevitably raises the question, how does Falcon BMS stack up against DCS World today? Chapter 12. Falcon B, MS, and DCS World. Anyone looking for a challenging military flight simulation today can hardly ignore one name, DCS World. A comparison with Falcon B, MS, therefore seems obvious. However, the two simulations have different focuses. DCS offers a wide selection of highly detailed aircraft and helicopters. Depending on the module, the cockpit, avionics, flight model, and weapon systems are simulated with tremendous attention to detail. Graphically, DCS also has clear strengths thanks to its more modern technical foundation. Falcon B, MS, on the other hand, has traditionally focused particularly heavily on the F-16 and combines this detailed simulation with its most distinctive feature, the dynamic campaign. The player doesn't just fly a single mission, they are part of a larger conflict that continues to unfold in the background. DCS also offers complex missions, campaigns, and extensive multiplayer scenarios. But the underlying philosophy differs. DCS truly shines as a modern platform for numerous highly detailed aircraft. Falcon B, MS shines when a detailed fighter jet becomes part of a dynamic war zone. That's why this comparison doesn't need a winner. Anyone who wants to get to know a wide variety of aircraft will find an impressive platform in DCS. Those who want to dive deep into the F-16 and a dynamic campaign will still find an unusual combination in Falcon B, MS today. And that's exactly why Falcon is still relevant at all after nearly 3 decades. It doesn't have to be more modern in every aspect, it just has to offer something that players still want to experience today. And that's exactly what it does. Chapter 13. Conclusion. Falcon 4 wasn't a perfect game. When it was released in 1998, it was buggy, hardware-intensive, and in some areas clearly not yet where its developers would have liked it to be. But behind these problems lay an extraordinary vision. Falcon didn't just want to simulate an F-16. It wanted to give it a world in which it actually had a mission. A war that didn't just begin when the player took off, and didn't end when he landed again. Perhaps this idea was too ambitious for the technology of the time and the scale of the project, but it was strong enough to survive. When official development ended, Falcon could have slowly faded away. Instead, the community took over. Players became modders. Modders became developers. And what started as a troubled 1998 video game eventually evolved into a simulation that is still being developed decades later. Of course, technology has long since changed. Other simulations look more modern, feature different aircraft, and set new technical standards. But Falcon's core concept doesn't need a modern graphics engine. The player isn't the center of the world. They are a part of it. Elsewhere, other aircraft take off. Units are moving on the ground. A conflict is unfolding. And right in the middle of it all, the player sits in his F-16, trying to complete his mission and make it back home. It was exactly this feeling that made Falcon 4 special. And it's exactly that feeling that lives on to this day. Perhaps that is Falcon's true legacy. Sometimes the most interesting computer games aren't created because their developers plan things out sensibly, but because they try to build something that's actually far too big. Falcon 4 was released in 1998. Its story is still unfolding today. Chapter 14. Reviews and Conclusion. How was Falcon 4 actually received by the trade press in the late 1990s? The answer fits surprisingly well with the overall story of this simulation. With great enthusiasm, but by no means without significant criticism. Even in the German gaming press, the ratings varied significantly. PC games rated Falcon 4 at 77% in early 1999. Power Play was much more enthusiastic, awarding it 92% and an award in its February 1999 issue. These two ratings alone show just how differently Falcon 4 was perceived at the time. This picture becomes even clearer when looking at the international trade press. The American PC Gamer gave it an outstanding 95%. Game Revolution was also among the game's biggest supporters, giving it 91%. At the very top of the rating scale was even Adrenaline Vault with 100 points. But by no means was every publication so enthusiastic. GameSpot rated Falcon 4 7.9 out of 10, Computer Games magazine even gave it just 70 out of 100 points. This meant there was a difference of up to 30 points between some of the reviews at the time. And it is precisely this enormous range that says a lot about Falcon 4. After all, many reviewers fundamentally recognized what an extraordinary project had been created here. They praised the game's immense depth of simulation, its detailed portrayal of modern aerial warfare, the F-16, and, above all, the dynamic campaign. Falcon gave players the feeling that they weren't just working through a series of pre-scripted missions, but were part of a larger conflict. But the criticism was just as understandable. Falcon 4 was released with bugs and technical issues. The simulation required powerful hardware, and the complex campaign in particular could put a heavy strain even on fast PCs. Its sheer complexity also meant that Falcon wasn't exactly the kind of game you could install and master completely just a few minutes later. This left reviewers at the time with a difficult question: should one primarily evaluate the extraordinary vision and the immense depth of the simulation, or should one place greater emphasis on the actual technical state in which the game was released? Those who were inspired by the vision could view Falcon 4 as a milestone in flight timeline. Those who placed greater weight on the bugs, performance issues, and the game's unfinished state inevitably arrived at a more critical conclusion. In retrospect, therefore, both sides are part of the history of Falcon 4. It was impressive and problematic, ambitious and, at times, overreaching, unfinished in some areas, and at the same time far ahead of its time. Based on 10 contemporary reviews tracked, Metacritic currently lists an average score of 85 out of 100. A strong score, but perhaps the individual reviews tell the story of Falcon 4 even better than this average. After all, hardly any other game fits so well within the 70 to 100 point range. Falcon 4 wasn't perfect, but it attempted something that very few games of its time even dared to do. And perhaps that's exactly why we're still talking about it nearly 3 decades later. This brings us to the end of our journey through the history of Falcon 4. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this documentary, I'd love for you to join me again for the next episode. There are still many classics, technical milestones, and nearly forgotten stories from the world of video games waiting to be rediscovered. See you next time on Classic Games History.